Hello, Urban America. I hope you've been well. I am coming at you on Thursday, November 9th, and it's actually 6:30ish. So this is right about the time when you would normally commute in and settle in to hear a lecture, but we're doing it virtually. So at the request of the university, we are web blended, and we're going to make the most of this and make sure you learn as much as possible. My goal for this recording is to finish out a few of the topics that I didn't develop completely last week in person, add some new material, specifically this trend called the City Beautiful movement, and then we will pick up with additional videos to finish out Chapter 6 and get you well into Chapter 7. So I'm coming to you from my office, and I'm wearing a very professorial sport coat. So hopefully this video feels particularly informative. So take a look at the slides, which should be picking up in the recording, I hope. And I'll go ahead and do the full screen so that you can really see everything as I speak about it. The big topic from last week was, of course, the rise of the political machines and then the backlash against the political machines in the form of municipal reformers. And so, to review, in a place where you had any sort of crisis, whether it be a disease crisis or, in the case of Galveston, Texas, a flood crisis, this is going to provide the emergency need for replacing the city government. And what happens is once you take away the power of immigrants, once you take away the power of the political machines, it's almost impossible to get that back. So in the case of Galveston, Texas, a coalition of ward bosses who had represented constituencies, including Latinos, they are cut out of the city government after 1911. The city went into such incredible crisis during the flood. This was like epic flood. This was like what happened recently in Houston, where it was beyond anyone's comprehension and people desperately needed food and water. This is like Puerto Rico level emergency. So the government was replaced, and there are all kinds of wealthy commissioner types placed in charge of Galveston. This is something you'll find in Chapter 6 as you read about the ward machines and the ward bosses, and then you follow the story through to the reformers. You're going to find this happening over and over again. Galveston is a specific example. The statistics on this are that there are over 400 cities across the United States by the year 1915, 456 to be precise, which are run by commissioners. Those commissioners are sometimes elected, but more often they are appointed. They are appointed, and remember this from last week. This is very important. Sometimes they serve for 5, 8, or even 10 years. Then, if you're reappointed, you can serve for a full 20 years and not have to face the voters once. Can you just imagine, those of you who live in Jersey City or Bayonne or places where we've just voted, where we have new elections? Sorry, I'm just going to make sure I'm keeping time here. Can you imagine if the people with power in Jersey City or Bayonne or West New York had no accountability to voters, no elections to worry about? It would be a totally different feel to government. And demographically, the people who ran commissions, the Parks Commission, the Water Commission, the Electric Supplier Commission, they tended to be overwhelmingly wealthy Protestant white males. That is who gets the job. We also have a new job review from last week. It's called City Manager. It sounds like a cool job. But again, these are appointed peoples. They bring a scientific approach. They have a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of focus on reform. And I would say their hearts were in the right place. These are people who care about their cities, who want to bring order, but they are appointed, and that's probably the biggest takeaway. So the bosses who are most clever, as review from last week, are those who, instead of being wiped off the map and going away completely, find a way to weasel into the commission government. The commission government is supposed to be appointed experts in environmental policy, experts in tax policy, right? And here come the bosses. In some cases, they can take the reform government and figure out how to get their people in and take over power once again. This famously happens in Omaha, Nebraska in 1912. It happens in Memphis under the leadership of this guy, Ed Crump, who's got like the perfect ward boss name. If you're studying for the final and you're trying to remember a name of a boss, Ed Crump of Memphis. That's memorable. And then the biggest and the baddest, remember Frank Hague. Remember that from 1917 to 1947, he ruled Jersey City with an iron fist. And he began to choose who got appointed to the commissions. So not all of the history of political machines is wiped away entirely. But in the spirit of this slide, shall I say, there was a flood of these new people, these commissioners and city managers taking over. Now, dramatically caps lock. This is the big lesson from last week. I wanted you to understand the significances of these reformers. They overwhelmingly, as argued on page 141, do not quite meet the needs of immigrants. This included also African American migrants who begin to come to the city through the Great Migration. There are a lot of rural blacks in places like Alabama and Mississippi who end up in Chicago and Detroit and Cincinnati, and these people are not being taken care of by the city commissioners, nor are the Italians or the Russian Jews, or the groups of people who famously come in the Ellis Island age. And so the argument in the textbook, and the argument that I wanted to really get you thinking, which is why it was in the challenge, it was in the class last week, the argument is that there are people who run reform governments, who do commission governments, city manager governments, who do take care of immigrants, but not all of them. And the social safety net was incomplete. So the substitution of these municipal reformers was incomplete in terms of the needs and the informal welfare that had been provided by the machines. So that's a big review topic. I hope you have got this clearly. You're ready to write about this in the final. And I hope this also gets you thinking about your paper topics. If you can find a city that interests you and include in some of your research and in some of your paper the age of machines and the age of reformers in your chosen city, hopefully this will be inspiring to you. We also have from last week, and this was when class was winding down, so I was going a little fast here, and I'm going to slow my roll a little bit and talk about the rise of social reformers, including many women who wanted to reform the family. They wanted to reform the home. Yes, people wanted the vote to be accurate and valid, but they also wanted to reform the home and the family. And these people, many of them women, who rise up as social reformers in Chapter 6, are big believers in journalism. Many of them become journalists themselves. In fact, this is a great career path in the 1880s and 1890s for women. Also, social science. Social science, this is the very era when the field that we now call social work takes shape. A lot of people in sociology and anthropology and also psychology, they begin to do ethnographic studies, they begin to study groups of people, they begin to study families, and they bring a whole scientific approach to reforming the family. The full-bore path for someone who cares about social reform might be to become a socialist. And this is fascinating because in a time right now in 2017 where it is very toxic to be called a socialist, one of the reasons that Bernie Sanders, in fact, did not get the nomination is that he had been accused of being a socialist in a negative connotation, in a negative way, which made him an unviable candidate. So if you're up to speed on politics recently, you'll recognize that one of his flaws was that people accused him of being a socialist. And this is something that people fear. Socialism is a worldwide phenomenon, and if you go too far down the socialist path, you end up with communism. This is something that people feared, especially in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. This is when a massive nation, the nation of Russia, goes so socialist that it becomes communist. And so this is a time when socialism was interesting, it was exciting, but it was also a bit dangerous. And what happens to the social reform movement is they're very successful in getting full-on socialists into public office. There are over 1,200 people who hold public office. Now, these are not massive positions. These are not governors, but they have jobs as mayors and as city managers and city commissioners in cultural agencies, in settlement houses. They are official public officers. And this is true for over 340 cities or smaller towns throughout the United States. So the rise of socialists was a blessing because socialists believe in keeping people fed and keeping people housed. They are very critical of corporations and the inequalities in society. They were interested in reforming society as a whole. It was a blessing because they did great work and they got a lot done. It was a curse, however, because these people are easily smeared. They are easily challenged on political grounds. And there is a whole argument against socialism in the United States that they are simply un-American. So it is quite an easy argument to make given our politics. This is true both historically and today. So I call them a blessing and a curse. Another big focus of the second half of chapter 6, after you get done with the bosses, which is a highly male-dominated world, you'll be reading about the women of social reform. And this is really quite exciting because women are really aggressively pushing into city politics through the social reform movement. It's also a great time for knowledge sharing, knowledge growth through research. The women and men who get involved in social reform really care very much about education, and they also care very much about publication. So they are experimenting with knowledge, they are publishing that knowledge, and it's a very exciting time to be in universities. The technology of the late 19th century lends itself to the social reform movement. And this is something that is stated in chapter 6, but it isn't developed fully. And I really wanted to break it down, and that's the job of a lecturer, is to really stoke your thinking and to get you to just stop and really think about how different it is to communicate by telephone or by telegraph, especially by telegraph, which is the equivalent of today's text. You get telephone calls that can be completed in an afternoon where you're spanning the city. You're speaking to 20 different people over a city block. You're speaking to 20 different people in 20 different neighborhoods. It's a really exciting way to do politics, but also to do social reform. The telegraph is even crazier because you can rapid fire if you are willing to pay for it, and it was relatively affordable. You had to pay per text or per telegram, but you could type out a message and send that message to 20, 40, 60, 80 people within an afternoon. And so the women who participated in the social reform movements often had access to money, to budgets, and the communication via telegraph means that you can send the words to another office. They'll type them out and they'll deliver your telegraph. It's like this instant messaging form for the late 19th century. Contrast this to the door-to-door, glad-handing, socializing, and vote promising that comes in the age of the political machines. In the political machine, it is all very interpersonal. The ward boss goes door to door. He knows people's names. It's a highly male system, and it's a highly door-to-door interpersonal system where everything depends on the handshake and the promise that they'll come back and bring the coal, that they'll come back and bring the turkey, that you will go to the polls and deliver the vote. And so everybody knew the advantage of the machine system. Everybody knew each other, and it was very easy to kind of feel out whether this person was going to do what they said they were going to do. The disadvantage is that it's only possible to speak to so many people in a given day.